All right, so today we're going to be looking at The Mountain 2,
Okay.
which is a Turkish film.
Right.
And we're going to be looking specifically at user reviews from IMDb
Sounds good.
because it has a surprisingly high average rating,
Okay.
but a lot of people are calling it propaganda.
Interesting.
So we're going to be looking at both the good and the bad.
Okay.
The praise and the criticism.
Gotcha.
So yeah, this should be pretty interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
So like I was saying, this movie has a 7 out of 10 on IMDb.
Wow, that's pretty high.
Which is pretty high. Like on the surface, that sounds like a pretty good movie.
Yeah.
And some people even give it perfect 10 out of 10 scores. And they praise like the action sequences. They say the action is very realistic and they like the acting.
Yeah.
And they even compare the special effects to like Hollywood blockbusters.
Oh, wow.
But then you have people like this one reviewer, Baynell,
Okay.
and they say, hey, I enjoyed the movie, but maybe I let a little bit of national pride sneak into my rating.
Oh, that's interesting.
They're kind of admitting that.
Yeah.
And they even suggest that like on a global scale, maybe the movie would be closer to a 7.5. Which is still pretty good.
Yes, definitely.
But yeah, it's like...
It makes you wonder, like, how much does cultural context play a role?
Exactly.
In how people rate a film?
Yeah, and we have another reviewer, Hüseyin Parler.
Okay.
And they basically say that viewers who aren't familiar with Turkish culture might miss some of the nuances of the film.
That makes sense.
So they might not connect with it on the same level as somebody who is very familiar with Turkish culture. And then, on the other hand, you have people like Boris181 and Fried Nabalem, and they think the high rating is super suspicious. They're hinting that there might be some review manipulation going on.
Ooh, interesting.
But yeah, it's like when you see such a high rating and then you see other people saying it's like completely fake.
Right.
It's like, what is going on here?
A real mystery.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have this whole thing about the movie being Turkish propaganda.
Oh, right.
Which a lot of reviewers bring up.
Like, how many people are saying that?
I mean, it's hard to say, like, a percentage.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a recurring theme in the reviews.
Like
people are using that word propaganda pretty frequently. For example, we have Angel Pacious 10.
All right.
And they ask, like, why is it that we're so quick to label something as propaganda when it comes from certain countries, but we give other countries a pass? And they specifically call out, like, American war films.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, are we holding certain countries to a different standard?
That's a good question.
Yeah, like, are we more critical of narratives that challenge our worldview?
Right.
Or our preconceived notions about certain countries?
Yeah, like, are we just bringing our own baggage to these films?
Exactly.
And that's affecting how we view them.
Yeah, so it's like The Mountain 2 kind of forces us to confront that.
Yeah.
Like, are we being fair, or are we letting our own biases influence how we interpret the movie?
Interesting.
But yeah, speaking of American war films, some reviewers are comparing The Mountain 2 to like a Hollywood action flick.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're saying it's cheesy, like it's full of like over-the-top action and explosions.
Gotcha.
But then other people are praising the realism, especially when it comes to the portrayal of the Turkish special forces.
Yeah.
Like one reviewer, Mustafaksoy 1955, they point out that the film actually features Turkish-made weaponry.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so it's like they're not even using like American guns or anything. It's all like locally sourced equipment.
Oh, wow.
Which I think kind of adds to this whole national pride thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And then another reviewer, I'll desert them. They really praise how the film depicts the Turkish military. Like their training, their equipment, even their ideology.
Interesting.
They see it as a very realistic and inspiring portrayal.
But then, on the other hand,
yeah,
some people might see that emphasis on the military as being a bit problematic.
Right.
Like maybe it's leaning too much into this nationalistic perspective.
Yeah, it's like that fine line between, showing national pride and then kind of going overboard and becoming like jingoistic.
Exactly.
But yeah, so we're kind of seeing this push and pull with The Mountain 2, where it's like trying to balance these familiar action movie tropes with this very specific Turkish perspective. And I think that tension is what's leading to these very diverse reactions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But, it's not all about explosions and gunfire.
Oh, really?
Like, some reviewers actually highlighted the film's exploration of the emotional and ethical dimensions of war.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, like they're saying it goes beyond just the battlefield spectacle, like Lochinol, for example.
Okay.
And they talk about how the film really portrays the emotional toll war takes on soldiers. It's not just about physical bravery, but also like the internal battles that these characters are facing.
Yeah.
And then Ketchwambu brought up a really interesting point.
Okay.
They highlighted how The Mountain 2 also explores like the motivations and sacrifices of journalists
Oh, wow.
who are covering the conflict.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not just about the soldier's perspective, but also about like the people who are trying to document what's happening and bring those stories to the world.
Absolutely.
And then Claudio Carvalho, they pointed out this really interesting ethical dilemma that the soldiers face in the film.
What is it?
So they're torn between following orders and protecting innocent civilians.
Oh, wow.
So it's like that classic conflict of duty versus conscience.
Yeah.
And it really adds like another layer of complexity to the characters.
For sure.
You know, because it's not always a clear-cut decision, especially in a war zone. And then lastly, we have Argyll 12.
Okay.
And they compared the Mountain 2 to a Turkish version of the Magnificent Seven.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because the plot also involves like a small group of soldiers who are defending a village against overwhelming odds.
Right.
So it's like that classic underdog story, which I think is a universal theme that resonates with audiences all over the world.
For sure.
But yeah, so Lochinol, they mentioned that this was actually their first experience with Turkish cinema.
Really?
And they said it opened up a whole new world for them.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's like...
It's like this gateway into a whole new cinematic experience.
Exactly. So yeah, I think that's a good place to stop for now.
Sounds good to me.
But we're going to be diving into some more specific details.
Okay.
From the reviews in the next part.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it. Okay, so pick it up where we left off.
Right.
One of the reviewers that we talked about was Mustafa Aksoy, 1955.
Yeah.
And they were really impressed by, like, how the film portrayed the Turkish military. Like, all the little details, you know, the training, the equipment, even the ideology.
Yeah, they were very specific.
Right. And it makes you wonder, like, how important is accuracy in a film like this?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean, is it more important to capture, like, the feeling or the spirit of something?
Yeah.
Even if some details aren't exactly perfect?
It's like, is it a documentary or is it entertainment?
Right, exactly.
But, I mean, I guess even if it's not a documentary, those choices still have an impact.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, does showing all this high-tech gear and these specific tactics, does that feed into that perception of propaganda that some people have? Like, if you're just watching this movie and you see the Turkish military portrayed as this like super competent, highly equipped force, it might make you think like, oh wow, Turkey's really powerful.
Yeah, and that might make you more likely to believe the film's message.
Right.
Even if it's not entirely accurate.
Exactly. And then you have reviewers like Boris 181 who are very skeptical of the high rating.
Yeah, they're like, hold on a second. Is this for real?
Yeah, they're hinting at like possible review manipulation.
Right. Is it like a coordinated effort?
Yeah, like are there bots involved?
Or just like a lot of super fans trying to boost the rating?
Yeah, or is it just a national pride thing?
Yeah, it's hard to say.
It's a mystery.
Yeah, but let's move on from the ratings for a second.
Okay.
And talk about the emotional impact of the film.
Right.
Because some reviewers really focused on that.
Yeah, like the human cost of war.
Right. They said the film didn't shy away from showing the emotional toll on both the soldiers and the civilians.
Like Lorcanol talked about how it showed the emotional scars, not just the physical ones.
Right. Yeah, it's like war can really mess you up.
Yeah, even if you make it out in live.
Right.
And then Ketchwambu had an interesting point about the journalists.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we often forget about the people who are risking their lives to report on these conflicts.
Yeah, they're on the front lines, too.
Yeah, and the Mountain 2 actually acknowledges that.
That's cool.
Yeah, it shows their perspective and their sacrifices.
Yeah, it's like a reminder that there are other heroes in war.
Right.
Not just the soldiers.
And speaking of heroes, Claudio Carvalho pointed out this ethical dilemma that the soldiers face. Like they have to choose between following orders and protecting innocent civilians.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, it's like duty versus conscience.
Right.
And it really makes you think, like, what would you do in that situation?
Yeah, it's not an easy answer.
And the film doesn't give you an easy answer either. It just shows the characters struggling with it.
Which makes it more realistic.
Yeah, and it makes them more human.
Right.
Because they're not perfect.
They're trying to do their best.
Exactly. And that reminds me of Argyll 12. Okay. They compared the Mountain 2 to like a Turkish version of the Magnificent Seven.
Oh, wow.
Because the plot involves a small group of soldiers defending a village.
Yeah. It's that classic underdog story,
Right.
which we see in so many films.
Yeah, and it works every time.
It's just so compelling.
And it shows that The Mountain 2, even though it's set in Turkey and it has Turkish characters,
Yeah.
it still taps into these universal themes.
Right, like courage, sacrifice, fighting for what's right.
Exactly. Those themes resonate with everyone.
Absolutely.
And that brings us back to Launching Nil.
Right, the person who said this was their first Turkish film.
Yeah.
What if other people have that same experience? Like, they go in expecting just an action movie,
right,
and then they come out wanting to learn more about Turkish cinema.
Yeah.
Maybe this film could be like a bridge.
That's great.
To a whole new world of film for them.
It's like a gateway drug, but for movies.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think that's another good place to pause.
Okay.
We're going to be talking about the bigger picture of Turkish cinema.
Right, like how this film fits into that.
Yeah, in the next part.
That's so good.
Okay, so we were talking about how The Mountain 2 might be like a gateway for people to discover Turkish cinema.
Right.
But how does it fit into the bigger picture of Turkish filmmaking?
Well, Turkish cinema has a really rich history.
Okay.
It's gone through different phases.
Uh-huh.
Like back in the 60s and 70s, there was this golden age.
Okay.
Where they were making all these really interesting films that reflected like the social and political realities of the time.
That's cool.
Yeah, and more recently, there's been this rise of Turkish directors
right,
who are gaining international recognition.
Yeah, I've heard of a few of them.
Yeah, so The Mountain 2 isn't just coming out of nowhere.
Right, it's part of a bigger story.
Exactly. It's part of this ongoing evolution of Turkish cinema.
And what are some of the common themes that we see?
Well, like a lot of national cinemas, Turkish films often deal with themes of identity.
Okay.
Like tradition versus modernity.
Right.
And the country's place in the world.
So, like, how does The Mountain 2 fit into all of that?
Well, on one hand, it seems to be part of this trend of recent Turkish films that explore themes of national strength and military prowess.
Okay, so it's not totally unique.
Right. But on the other hand, some reviewers pointed out that the film also explores like ethical dilemmas and the human cost of war.
Right, so it's not just blindly glorifying the military.
Exactly. It's a bit more nuanced than that.
And I think that's what makes it so interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not a simple film with a simple message.
Right. It's trying to say something.
Yeah, and it's sparking these conversations about important issues.
And that's ultimately what makes it so impactful.
Yeah, it's not just entertainment.
Right.
It's actually making people think.
So what do you think after hearing all of this?
Yeah.
Would you be more inclined to watch The Mountain 2?
I mean, yeah, I think so.
Okay.
It definitely sounds like a movie that's worth watching.
I think so, too.
Even if you don't agree with everything it's saying.
Yeah, it's still valuable to engage with different perspectives.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe it'll even inspire you to check out more Turkish films.
Yeah, that's what happened to me.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of film. It can open up a whole new world for you.
So until our next deep dive,
keep exploring.
Keep those conversations going.